Command General Ashur-danin Apla stared grimly across the plains from his chariot as it bumped along the dense, rocky desert landscape. Gripping his iron spear while he surveyed the Levantine forces waiting for their advance, Ashur cut a towering, imposing figure on the battlefield. Just over 6 feet 6 inches tall, with muscles that surged with raw power beneath bronze-hued skin, marked by generations of warriors in his bloodline. A clean-shaven head and square-cut beard lent his features a stern countenance. He wore a knee-length iron-scaled shirt of armor over a thick leather tunic that afforded him protection while maintaining mobility. Gilded vambraces shielded his forearms, matched by greaves guarding his shins. Intricate Assyrian runes decorated each piece, priceless work gifted to him from some of the most skilled craftsmen Nineveh had ever seen. A sweeping cape of crimson flowed behind General Ashur's shoulders. The vibrant dye and regal garment marked his elite status as commander, reporting only to the king of Assyria himself. Across his chest, he bore a bandolier lined with throwing spears and an iron longsword in a jewel-encrusted scabbard, his weapons of choice that felt more familiar to him than the very air he breathed. Intimidation was not just a weapon. It coursed through his veins, the very lifeblood of his best military strategies. His piercing eyes burned with authority, and generations of Assyrian martial prowess distilled into one frame. Where he rode, conquest and ruination followed. Because he never traveled alone.
The dogs thirst for victory today,
came a guttural growl from above and beside him. General Ashur glanced up at his hardened warhound, Zagzigu, who bared his blood-stained teeth that measured nearly 14 inches in length, longer than the standard-issue hilt and dagger most Assyrian soldiers carried on their calves. Over the northern ridge spilled the Assyrian horde, a swelling mass of iron-clad warriors and rumbling chariots. At their fore swarmed the attack dogs, adorned in strange leather and metal armor that seemed to have no commonality of style between species. Many of them were equal in size to the horses they ran alongside, and they numbered over 200 in sum. Zagzigu was easily 10 times larger than the horses he ran near. He was a Molossian, a mastiff breed carefully cultivated for their savagery and size over dozens of generations. Every bit of 16 feet tall, from the ground on which he stood to the top of his shoulder blades. Rippling slabs of sinew bulged under his short brindled coat that bore the crisscrossing scars of many previous battles. Zagzigu was a war machine. Most of the Assyrian ships could not handle either his size or his weight. He was the stuff of nightmares, a living legend of chaos and terror for those who lived in the lands outside his home city of Nineveh. His massive, blocky head sat atop a thickly corded neck, perfectly designed for locking jaws and crushing bone. Despite his imposing bulk, Zagzigu moved with deceptive speed when unleashing violence, propelling his frame into opponents before they could react. He relished close-quarter combat and the feeling of death in his formidable fangs and paws. With a bite strong enough to cut men in half, one right after the other as one might slices of bread, the colossal beast began walking at a slower pace that appeared to be almost mechanical in nature. It was that methodical. The giant canine's eyes were locked on the Egyptian general. He didn't look right or left for even a moment. Not breaking eye contact, he roared over the cacophonous melee. Death now stalked the battlefield. Behind him on either side were nearly a dozen other hounds, 10 or 12 feet tall at the shoulder. as the two armies clashed. General Asher said in his loudest voice, "May we end this as quickly as it begins. For today we bring glory to Assyria and fertilize this land with the blood of her enemies." At the front lines, the war dogs snarled and snapped, consumed with battle fury. 20,000 Assyrian warriors surged forward, a relentless tide. Arrows whistled overhead, felling men and hound alike. But still, they charged, undeterred, consumed by raw savagery. A few arrows stuck to Zagzagoo, but he didn't notice. The war dogs broke through first, tearing into enemy flesh, their vicious jaws shredding armor and limb. Spears and swords bore down on them, but the dogs were too quick. Trained to kill since puppyhood, the smallest among this particular elite front-running force weighed just under 400 pounds. A short distance away from the fray, Zagzagoo broke into a trot. All 28,000 pounds of him gliding across the sand and stone with practiced ease. The ground shook. Small stones were tossed into the air, and men and animals desperately flung themselves away from his massive paws as he barreled forward, an unstoppable mass of sheer power and primal fury. General Khonsu had made peace with his role as leader of the Egyptian army, resigned to give his life for the country and people he loved so much. He grunted as he swerved his chariot through dog and man alike with his left hand, his right clutching a spear that plunged into Assyrian soldiers. He swung the horses around, emerging for a moment from the chaos to make another pass. Time seemed to stop as he chanced to look up at the sun, which was shining brightly, catching a brief second of beauty as the dust from the battle glistened across his vision. There aren't that many clouds out today. That was the last thought that ever passed through his mind. Faster than his brain could comprehend what was happening, the giant paw of Zagzagoo landed on one of the two horses that pulled his chariot, crushing the animal's spine and killing it in one fell blow. The open, gaping jaw of the mammoth-sized hound crashed onto General Khonsu and slayed him in an instant. This wasn't the first time Zagzagoo had made a kill in this manner. Instinctively, he knew to tuck his head in towards his chest and completed his fall with a roll that crushed 12 Egyptian archers. Standing to his feet, he shook his head and wasted no time diving straight back into battle. He would send men to meet God until he heard the horns that signified victory. The panicked, leaderless Levantine forces began to come apart at the seams, scattering from their previously structured positions. But General Asher was prepared. "Release the reserves," he commanded. Columns of fresh Asu soldiers, thousands strong, flooded in from the outside edges. Driving the Levantine lines backward, General Asher slew foes left and right from his chariot, cutting a swath through the Levantine ranks. As the minutes turned to hours and the trapped Egyptian army fought back in vain, with no hope of rescue or conceding defeat, the dogs did most of the work. They were the core of Assyria's might, honed to a vicious edge. By dusk, the plains ran dark and slick with blood. Zagzagoo trotted up to his commander. His gravelly tones carried unsettlingly across the quiet scene of destruction. His voice unemotional as he spoke, panting heavily.
Can we finish this?
Command General Asher nodded, out of breath and exhausted. Zagzigu abruptly turned and headed towards the city of Eltekeh with the rest of the Assyrian force, following his mythically massive strides. In the distance, the cries of carrion crows mingled with the howls of dogs savoring victory. Before the sun dipped below the horizon, the city gates had been smashed, and the Assyrians poured in to claim slaves, plunder, and victory. Inside the royal tent a few hours later, King Sennacherib sat upon his throne, reviewing maps and reports. Before him stood both human and war dog commanders, each hardened and bearing scars and stains from countless previous campaigns. King Sennacherib had the carefully cultivated presence and persona of a truly royal figure. The Assyrian monarch stood nearly 7 feet tall with a strong, sturdy frame, honed by years of military training in his youth. His exposed arms were deep brown and marked by tattoos and braided leather cuffs, denoting his sacred kingship. Sennacherib's bearded face had a heavy intensity. His hair flowed long and black as night beneath his ornate crown, inset with rubies and decorative gold patterns. His pronounced brow cast his dark, deep-set eyes in shadow, adding to his cold gravitas. Armor plates decorated with Assyrian lion and eagle motifs adorned Sennacherib's chest and shoulders. Beneath his molded breastplate, he wore a paradoxical robe of luxurious crimson, hemmed with golden thread that did not match the rest of his military garb. The garment's dark hues seemed to absorb all light, rendering the king's movements even more imposing and sinister. Zagzigu had picked a spot, lying down on the ground outside the tent, with his head filling the entrance flaps, so as to not miss any of the debriefing that would begin shortly. Just inside the doorway to his left, standing at a mere 8 feet tall at the shoulder, was Akkad the stocky pit bull terrier, renowned for his speed and haphazard risky behaviors. Enkidu, the sly black jackal hound approximately 7 feet tall, known for her agility in anticipating the enemy's moves during battle. But most cunning was Gula, the scrappy mutt with a talent for tactics, though smaller in stature at a mere 5 feet tall at the shoulder blades than brutish war beasts like Zagzigu. The canine of indeterminate breeding carried himself with a clever lightness, ears and tail always pricked for opportunity. His fur was a patchwork of browns, greys and beige, as if he had hand-picked camouflage to blend into desert, forest and city alike. Everything about the war dog's demeanor signaled constant machinations churning beneath the surface. The chipped notch in Gula's left ear from some long-ago skirmish added a rebellious flair, hinting at his storied history getting in and out of mischief and peril alike, thanks to sheer improvisation, attraction to risk, and seemingly limitless volumes of pure luck. Gula's restless energy demanded outlet in feats of intellect and wit. His passion was outmaneuvering foes through creative challenges versus sheer strength. For him, the mind was the ultimate weapon and playground. As the other dogs recounted the battle, Gula saw his chance. "Yes, much blood was spilled this day," interrupted Gula, "but it was my platoon whose maneuvers carried the ridge. Had Kittu not spotted a gap in their lines and driven my soldiers through at a critical moment, our flank would have collapsed. But thanks to her keen eye and quick thinking, we crushed the Levantine leeches and achieved total victory. Also, did anyone notice Zagzigu? Zag, I didn't see you there. Did you have an appointment, or did you oversleep again?" The flicker of a smile flashed across Zagzigu's face.
Yesterday was bath day, so I skipped work.
The dogs all growled and groaned in solidarity with the terrible joke. Every one of them had seen the cold-blooded execution of the enemy general. The only thing they hated more than a latecomer to a battle was bath day, required by the Assyrian king once a month, at a minimum regardless of rank, title, or species. "Shut up, cur. You may snap at anything that buzzes by you, but there's no way you could have stood a chance out there without us. Besides, we made you what you are." General Masahata resented being shamed. King Sennacherib had allowed him a few moments to regain some respect, but waved his hand to silence the protesting before things escalated any further. "While I recognize the cunning of you and your pack, Gula, you would do well to not forget all my warriors performed with honor today." "Yes, of course, great king," said Gula, dipping his head and continuing with a deeply sarcastic tone, completely unfazed by the king's diplomatic reply. "But consider this. While your human soldiers are limited by their clumsy 2 legs and feeble, practically useless teeth, we once again championed a win with unsurpassed speed, ferocity, and instinct for the kill. Why, had you sent us dogs in alone, we'd have demolished those Levantine river rats in half the time. We were born and bred to destroy your enemies. When we aren't doing that, we're, bored out of our minds." The other dogs barked in agreement as General Masahata and his military leaders rolled their eyes. King Sennacherib burst into laughter. "Very well, Gula, I shall increase the rank of you, canines, but do not think I underestimate the might of Assyria's human forces. Together, we shall continue seizing victory and expanding the empire." Gula nodded, satisfied with the negotiation. "Let's go over a few things we did poorly. That's my favorite part of this meeting. That probably could have been a scroll instead. Akkad, you want to start us off?" The torchlight flickered on man and dog alike as the moon climbed higher into the chilly desert night. The novel and serialized audiobook Hounds of War is written and produced by James Eldridge. It is a work of fiction. However, King Sennacherib was the king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire from the death of his father Sargon II in 705 BC to his own death in 681 BC. The second king of the Sargonid dynasty, Sennacherib, is one of the most famous Assyrian kings for the role he plays in the Hebrew Bible, which describes his campaign in the Levant. Other events of his reign include his destruction of the city of Babylon in 689 BC and his renovation and expansion of the last great Assyrian capital, Nineveh. By the time Sennacherib became king, the Neo-Assyrian Empire had been the dominant power in the Near East for over 30 years, chiefly due to its well-trained and large army superior to that of any other contemporary kingdom. During the expansion of Assyria into a major empire, the Assyrians had conquered various neighboring kingdoms, either annexing them as Assyrian provinces or turning them into vassal states. Most of Sennacherib's campaigns were not aimed at conquest, but at suppressing revolts against his rule, restoring lost territories, and securing treasure to finance his building projects. You can read more about him in 2 Kings chapters 18 and 19. To see images from this story, or purchase the book in hardcover or Kindle versions, visit houndsofwarbook.com.
Hounds